there has to be a conscience there.
We've always understood certain things to be wrong, right? Even if you look at like the Aztecs who performed human sacrifice, right?
The psychological and the immaterial, I guess the conscience, it's almost like they're in a sort of battle.
How much can cultural indoctrination or cultural context shape that intuitive gut reaction? You know, you have to peel back a lot of indoctrination to get to the root of killing is bad, but then on the outside it's killing is good because of, you know, all these cultural reasons that I've been brought up in, right?
Yeah.
I like to think that episode 4.
Well, back at it again.
Take two. But yeah, so this episode we're going to be talking about ethics, and specifically how we come up with our ethics. You know, where do our ethical decision making and our ethical systems come from, right? Specifically, I have this theory, and I think, Ben, you sort of agree with me on this theory, is that basically the way that ethical systems, like, you know, if you've heard of utilitarianism or deontologism, is that the right word? Whatever. Or, you know, virtue ethics.
I think that works.
Virtue ethics or whatever, right? You know, where do these systems come from and how do they play a role in our lives? Now, my argument is that these systems are kind of a bit moot. What I mean is that usually you have an action or something that happens, and we have an instinctive reaction to that action, which makes us create a judgment, you know, whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, whether that's right or wrong. And then only after all of that, then we retroactively create, you know, ethical systems or reasoning or logical reasoning to justify our instinctive judgment. If that makes sense.
As opposed to what?
Well,
what's the common...
So the common flip side would be, I have an ethical system, like utilitarianism, that I've come up with, right? And I follow that utilitarian system. And so when I see something, I measure it against the utilitarian ethical system, and then I determine whether it's right or wrong. Right? But I think it's the other way around. I think people come up with their reasonings after the fact, after they've already made the judgment.
And and as far as I understand, the first step of making that judgment for this theory is an intuition, right?
Yes.
And that kind of plays to Aquinas' concept of synderesis, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so synderesis is basically Aquinas' notion for natural law. So basically he says that, you know, God imbues within all humans a conscience, right, a consciousness, and that conscience has a natural attunement to the natural law of good. You know, whatever God, it points towards God, which is the good, right? That conscience pointing towards God, that's synderesis. That's the intuitive understanding of what's right and wrong, right? But you can even take this whole line of thinking in like a secular way as well, right? It's not just Aquinas, where you can see this sort of thing. My favorite example for this actually is when you look at ethical dilemmas, right? So you have all these ethical dilemmas, right?
Love these.
Yeah. My favorite is, have you heard of the short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I do like that one.
Yes.
It's the one where the kid's tortured.
Yeah.
And the whole village survives off one kid being tortured, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And usually the way that you would frame this as an ethical dilemma is it would typically frame towards a utilitarian, right? So utilitarian is someone who's like, you know, balancing good and bad, like what produces the most good and what reduces the evil, right? Like it's sort of like a mathematical formulaic way. If you meet someone who's a utilitarian, right, and you tell them the story of the ones who walk away from Omelas, the question you would ask is, do you walk away? Do you leave? Now, Ben, what would you do if you live in a city and there was a little child being tortured? You can't free the child, but do you stay?
I think I'd leave.
You think you'd leave?
I think I would leave.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what 99% of people say. However, if we were to follow the model where you have your ethical system and you follow that to a T, and you follow the rules of that ethical system, right? And you ask the utilitarian that question, they would say no. In fact, it is morally wrong to leave. Because by leaving, you are depriving yourself of pleasure, of happiness, or whatever, of good, right? In exchange for no benefit. Like, the child is suffering all the same.
Yeah.
Right?
So
But
you may as well make the most of the
yeah,
suffering.
exactly right. But I implore you to try and find someone who would say, yeah, I would stay. I would stay, and I would profit off this of this child. I think everyone has this instinctive gut reaction, like, no, this is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Right. And even if you ask the utilitarian that question, right, there are two responses that you can get. One is they swallow the uncomfortable pill and say, no, I would stay because I'm a utilitarian. The second, more common one is they rethink their utilitarian philosophy. Right? It makes them question and say, maybe utilitarianism is not the system that I should follow. Right? Which I think is very telling. Right? Because if it was action leading to creation of a system, leading to judgment based off that system, you would just accept the judgment based off the system. But if it's action, judgment, then system, right? The judgment is the thing that stays the same all the time. The system is the thing that changes.
Yeah.
Because it comes after the fact.
Do you think in today's culture there are any utilitarians? Do you think... That's what I'm trying to understand.
I think...
Because it's not like people are going to be like, I would stay because I'm a utilitarian. This is like, look, I have utilitarianism in my bio. I follow that.
I think it depends on what you mean by utilitarianism, because I think utilitarianism, is the ethical system that people follow sort of by default, right?
It feels right.
It feels right?
Yeah.
Like, if I were to ask a random person who's no interest in philosophy or ethics or whatever, how do you make decisions? Like, what how do you make good or bad? What do you think is good or bad? Or if you present someone with, for example, the trolley problem, right? Often they will lean upon, whether consciously or unconsciously, a utilitarian sort of philosophy. Whereas, there's 5v1, I think you should save the 5. Right, because it's more people, it's a very intuitive sort of system, right? Now that's what, if you mean by that utilitarian, like, basic sort of, let's maximize good, minimize evil, that seems right.
I think, that's plausible.
I think most people would say, I'm a utilitarian.
Yeah.
But I think when you really dig into utilitarianism, with usually ethical dilemmas, like the ones who walk away from Omalas, variations of that, there's another one with the surgeon, kill 5 people, or kill one person, it halves their organs, to save 5 people, right? If you really drill into them, they would probably say, maybe I'm not a utilitarian, right? I think if you want a good example of a pure utilitarian, someone who would just like accept the disgusting truths of utilitarianism, you might look at Peter Singer. Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like that utilitarian philosopher. He wrote an essay one time about saying, like, basically advocating for euthanizing children who had like disabilities, basically, like severe mental disabilities, basically, because they were like they would negatively impact society. Like, he's a hardcore utilitarian, and like
he's got utilitarianism in his bio, like.
Well, he's got utilitarianism written all over his forehead, basically. Like, he's.
All right. But so you said that is the natural one that people lean towards, right?
Yeah.
So doesn't that undermine our idea of synderesis? How everyone has implanted in them sort of a moral compass towards the good?
I don't think so, because I think, look, there is an aspect to which a utilitarian framework is intuitively good, right? It's when you take it to its logical conclusion that it falls apart, right? But the basic principle of maximizing good and minimizing bad is something that aligns with a natural law of good, right? It is only when, for the sake of a utilitarian point of view, you commit a grave evil, that it seems to unintuitively fall apart, right? So instead of, like, something as extreme as a torturing child, you're picking between you know, giving $100 to one person or giving $100 to two people, right? When the evil is not great or grave, right? It is still a natural. There is still a natural inclination towards helping more people than less people, right? So I do think that yes, utilitarianism. I think it is a intuitive framework, but then when you take the laws or the rules of utilitarianism to its very extreme, it becomes unintuitive. If that sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think utilitarianism is, I think, the perfect case study for this, right? Because, when you present someone with utilitarianism, it makes sense for most of their moral decisions they make throughout their day, right? If, they're deciding whether or not to give to charity, they say, oh, I want to help more people, and so I'll give to charity. That's a moral decision that people make, and that aligns with utilitarianism. Most of the moral decisions you would make in your everyday life will follow a utilitarian philosophy of helping more people and, like deciding not to punch a homeless guy.
Yeah,
because
when it gets to the point of, like
for-
Raskolnikov and
yeah, exactly. Like, and so it is useful for your everyday things, but then it falls apart at its absolute most extreme logical conclusion.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good case study to show how intuition plays into our ethical decision making and our development of ethical systems.
Okay, so one more time, do you want to define what is synderesis, like in the shortest way that we can put it?
Oh, okay.
It's hard because,
well, with all this, because I think synderesis is,
or at least, sorry, not synderesis, because that's the whole like theory. Maybe just this idea of
okay,
a moral compass.
Yeah, I think in summation, basically, we have a natural intuition from whatever means. We haven't discussed that, but we'll get to that, right? But we have a natural inclination. I can't speak today. An inclination towards some sort of good. We have an intuitive understanding of what is good and bad that we use to make our judgments. So we use intuition to make our judgments rather than using our logical systems to make our judgments.
So it relies on the idea that good and evil is objective. It's an objective thing.
I don't know, actually. Does it rely on that? Because I think that you can look, I think good and evil is an objective thing, right?
Yeah.
But you can fit this framework in a non-objectivist point of view.
Really?
If you were to do it, you would basically say that, because a way a non-objectivist handles morality is that, your morality inside your own head, basically, is only inside your own head and is a product of, billions of factors, your cultural context and your upbringing and things like that, right? And so for a moral relativist, you might say, they can say, well, all of, your cultural context, your upbringing, all of that is basically injected into your brain, and that forms like a moral compass of sorts, right? And then based off that framework, you can then then you make judgments on what is good and bad.
Okay.
Right. So an
an
objectivist would say, morality is prescribed by God or some higher being, right? And placed into you, and that's your moral compass. Whereas a relativist would say your cultural context influences or directs you, like creates your moral compass, and then you form your intuition based around that.
Okay.
Right. So I don't think it's inherently a moral objectivist view, but I am a moral objectivist.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah.
So when we get to the question of where does this inclination come from?
Yes.
How would you respond to that?
Personally, I would say, we're both Catholic.
Yeah.
So personally, I would follow Aquinas' view. Basically say, when God created us, with a body, not just a body, but also a soul, right, in his image and likeness, as Genesis says, right? In that soul is that conscience, that moral compass that points towards natural good, right? That points towards the natural law, right? The natural law, that the intuitive feeling that killing is bad. Even before you've created, like, your logical framework or your logical syllogism, say premise A this, premise B this, therefore killing is bad, right? Before all of that, you have a feeling that killing is bad, right? And a good example of this is incest, right? Do you think incest is wrong?
Yes, but is it really a good example? Because
Okay, because
it's not as clear cut as it is it?
well, I would say that you say yes instantly, right? If you asked, 99% of people, they would say incest is wrong, right? But then you ask them why, and they say, oh, well, the children can, the children might have mental disabilities or something. I say, well, imagine if both parties are, they take birth control. That's 100% correct, or 100% non-failing, right? So there's no negative consequences. There's no social consequences.
Yeah, so that's a stupid argument to say that. Wouldn't it be stupid to say it's wrong because the result is children have disabilities?
Like, you can minimize all of the consequences of incest, right? And just say the act of incest itself, outside of its consequences, is it wrong?
Yeah,
and you would still say yes. Because
I haven't looked into it that much, honestly.
But I think,
I've heard people say no, it's fine.
Well,
Obviously, I wouldn't do it, but
yeah, I think some people would say, or some people would swallow the uncomfortable pill and say, oh, incest is fine. But I think most people, if you ask like your average Joe Schmo, right,
it's definitely
who isn't around trying to justify incest, right, they would say no. Even if you remove all the consequences of the negative consequences of incest, there is just something. There's just something off about it. There's something wrong about it, right? You just feel it.
And yet, you read the Bible, you read
the
Quran for some people, whatever.
Yeah,
and it's all in there.
Well, it's all in there, but I think
it's in my it's in many people's lineage. They'll look up and they'll see, oh my great grandfather married his cousin.
Yeah.
So how is it really a thing of it's always been something like that, or is it just now that we're becoming more, we have more of an aversion to it?
Yeah.
And we say it's morally wrong.
Yeah. So are you saying that this intuition, right? Are you asking where does this intuition that incest is wrong comes from, right?
Yeah, because you're arguing if it's something deeply in your heart, or soul, then it would doesn't matter the time, it would always be there, right?
Yeah.
So you'd see throughout history people hold this.
Yeah.
Right, but that doesn't seem to be the case, does it?
Yeah. Well, I guess that is linked to the big question of where does this intuition come from, right? Because if it does come from some objective higher being, right? Yeah, it would be it would suggest that incest would have this instinctive feeling of being wrong throughout all time, all culture.
Although current cousin marriage is very different to sibling marriage.
Yeah.
So I think throughout history, everyone probably knew that marrying your sister is not good.
Yeah. Yes, that's definitely not good.
So maybe you're right. Maybe there is a.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think stuff like that, stuff like incest with your immediate sibling, stuff like killing, or murder or assassination, whatever. That's just something that's inside of you that, because I'm a Catholic, I say that God implanted as part of my conscience, right?
Okay.
But if you were agnostic or atheist, right? I mean, I think the argument would either be evolutionary or cultural, right?
But that's very different, isn't it? Because evolutionary, it implies that moral compass can change. So in 500 years, maybe humans will believe that murder is
I think the evolutionary argument, I think you're right in the sense that because the evolutionary argument goes that the instinct, right, the intuitive aversion to certain things is a product of the fact that of a product of a trait that would be beneficial for human survival.
Yeah.
Right. So if the conditions of the Earth change as such that killing now became optimal for human survival, and you believe that evolution dictated this moral intuition, then I wouldn't say 500 years, but in 300,000 years, I think the intuition would shift towards...
Really?
Yeah. If
But
you
then
believe
there's-
if you
then-
believe that evolution is the
Oh,
driving
okay,
factor,
but you wouldn't believe that.
I personally wouldn't
That
say that.
denies
Yeah,
that there's
but if
some
you
kind of
if you're
objective.
saying that it's a proper evolution, right?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of merit to that argument, right? Because I think a lot of the things that cause natural aversions or natural aversion away from certain
Yeah.
things are things that would be negative to the survival of a species, right? So, for example, our natural aversion to sibling marriage or sibling procreation is there is an evolutionary there's an argument to say there's evolutionary basis for that,
it makes
because
sense.
if you have sex with your sister and you have a child, the child is not going to live very long, right? And so there's an evolutionary, survival reason. Same thing with like murder and stuff, right? If you want to, have a species that survives, it's not beneficial for them to want to kill each other, right? So I think there is some merit to it, but then becomes the issue of if it's a moving target, then you're denying objective reality or objective morality. Sorry, right? So I think the evolutionary argument is stronger than the cultural argument. The cultural argument is like, you have your cultural factors that influence your moral compass, and then then you make your moral decisions. Biggest issue with the cultural argument, in my mind, is a bit circular, because you go, the cultural factors dictate the morality of you, but then what dictates the culture? There's no baseline factor that drives the whole system, right?
Yeah, it doesn't really.
Whereas
make sense.
evolution, you can rely upon the principle of survival and the principle of natural selection. Whereas there's no real principle for the cultural argument, right? But yes, I believe that morality is objective, right? Because I believe in God. But I do think that the second most plausible justification for this moral intuition is
the
evolutionary one. Because I think there is more meat to that. There's more basis for that. What's another example? For example, so I mentioned Peter Singer. Peter Singer has this ethical conundrum, which I like to bring up, but I don't really like. Basically, he says, if you saw a child drowning in a puddle while you're walking by, do you save them? And if you save them, you ruin your $50 shoes, right? You have to throw them away. Now, if you didn't save that child, you'd be pretty much a monster, right? Because if you didn't save that child for the sake of your shoes, right? But then when some charity comes knocking at your door, says with $50 you can save a child in Africa. If you don't give them the money, you're seen as less of a devil than if you didn't save the child from the puddle.
Yeah.
Now,
it's a really interesting one.
Peter Singer uses it to argue that, culture, Peter Singer uses it to argue that, we should be giving more to charity, basically, right? The way I see it is, the one with the child in the puddle is, very immediately, and you can see it immediately. Right, whereas the one with the charity people, you don't see the impact, right?
It's different.
Yes, if you were to view it through evolutionary lens, it would make sense for humans to evolve to want to help immediate danger, right? But not evolve to instinctively want to help danger somewhere far away, right? Because back in caveman times or whatever, there is no possibility that you could help someone 10,000 kilometers away. So you wouldn't even conceive of it being bad to not do so. Whereas if it seems more reasonable if you're a caveman or if you're an early human to see someone, 2 feet in front of you, you need to save them. That's the instinctive reaction. I think that's the strongest argument for the evolutionary argument for intuition.
Yeah.
In my opinion. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I would be interested in hearing, what other people think. I mean, I'm sure people listening to this, you might disagree with us. You might disagree with the whole theory. You might say, I think, the system comes to us. I think reason comes to us before emotion or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the evolutionary one is quite different to the one that you're proposing, right?
I mean, yeah, it's very different to the one that involves God, right? Yeah. The principle of synderesis, it relies upon the existence of God, and we can talk about why we believe God exists, but that could be a whole 3-hour episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I think yes. If you believe in God, I think it's.
Yeah, we were just talking about this.
I think it's a lot simpler.
Yeah, we were just
we
talking
talking about this. Like,
yeah, being a Christian makes all these questions simpler.
yeah, it does solve a lot of difficult philosophical questions because you can just say, God did it.
And I think ultimately, we were talking about this in episode 2.
Yeah.
When we talked about philosophy and what's the point of philosophy.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think you have to accept that there's a certain line beyond which humans simply, we're not meant to understand.
Yeah, we can't really
Yeah.
truly get at it. And I think one of these things might be, where does our intuitive aversion to certain actions come from, right? Like, how do we make our moral decision? Because I explained, we talked about, there's problems with the explanation of culture. There's a problem with the explanation through evolution, right? So it's probably God, but we don't really know, and we will never really know, I think. But I think the principle of synderesis is probably, the strongest argument, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we live in a time when there's a lot of moral issues and it's very polarized.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to see that, to accept that we all have some kind of common ground.
Yeah.
In which, you know what I mean?
That's really true, because that really throws a wrench in my thinking then. Because, right now, people have such polar opposite view of morality, right?
So how do we account for that?
So how we account for that if we go with the worldview that, there is an innate natural law which our conscience is pointed towards, right? How can you therefore resolve this innate natural intuition that everyone supposedly shares with the insane polarization of moral opinion?
Because it gets to a point where you kind of have to say, and I would say, sure, we have some sort of innate moral compass.
Yeah.
But that, it's fragile, It can be, you can be indoctrinated. That can be twisted.
Yes.
And
yes.
you can be told lies to a point where that becomes your compass. At least psychologically. I don't know about the immaterial, but psychologically, the psychological and the immaterial, I guess the conscience, it's almost like they're in a sort of battle for your judgment,
No, I think that's a really, really good point, actually, because like what you're saying, I think is, we have our first moral compass, but then that moral compass is not immune, right? So, we talked about this model where action, intuition, judgment, reasoning. But then there's another step after this, right? Where person A takes that reasoning that they come up with based off their judgment and then explains that reasoning to person B. And that affects their intuition and their judgment and their reasoning. Yes.
No, I see, yeah.
Yeah, because I think we all have that same starting point, right? We all have that same starting point. But then we go different ways. And not only do we go different ways, we share our different ways, right?
Yeah.
I think that's and then that changes your intuition, right?
But this is what I'm trying to figure out. Can something so immaterial, something that many would believe, we would believe, that God placed inside your conscience, can that really be malleable? Or is it that something covers it up, or something distorts our perception of it?
So you're saying like we have our innate moral intuition.
Yeah.
But then
can that be changed?
We can be convinced and then cover up that moral intuition by this new framework.
Yeah. So
that
like
changes.
in denial. Like you're just...
Yeah.
It's hard to...
Well, I don't know. Like...
And it's interesting as well, sorry.
Yeah.
How with some things, like murder, it can be so clear-cut.
Yeah.
At least for most people. But then when it comes to murder with a caveat... Like, many people would say euthanasia is murder.
Yes.
But then it has certain caveats. Then how that becomes distorted.
Yeah.
And so how does that work? Okay.
But I think maybe our new framework is a mix of the original synderesis, but also including the evolutionary and cultural factors, right? Because you have your innate intuition, but then you can be convinced otherwise. Now, does that change the intuition or cover it up? I have no idea. You would have to do some. We don't have the resources to do some deep psychoanalysis on someone who's that's happened to, right? Like, because like you would have to, if you were to try and want to figure that out, you would have to find a serial killer, and then figure out if they inside of their heart of hearts, like they intuitively want to kill someone, or they've developed some framework which they believe has become so airtight to justify it.
I think it's different because I don't think serial killers think it's morally right what they're doing, or at least
Okay, yeah. Let me think of a different
maybe
example.
not serial killer, but how about let's say a kid grows up in a state in which it's a terrorist state.
Yeah.
And they're indoctrinated that what they're doing is actually the greatest thing they could possibly do.
Yeah.
And it'll send them straight to heaven if they
Yeah.
blow themselves up.
Yeah.
How about that? Because they truly are convinced
That's true.
that what they're doing will makes them a great person.
Is there that intuition within them that says killing is wrong, but then it gets overridden by the indoctrination? Or does that indoctrination fundamentally change their intuition to the point where, they're willing to kill? That's a very good question. And we do not have the psychology degrees to figure that out.
Thank you for listening.
But if someone has access to a terrorist and a psychology degree,
no, I think there has been studies.
Yeah.
Especially Americans who have gone in to places.
Yeah.
You have to see. I don't know.
But yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. Is how much can cultural indoctrination or cultural context shape that intuitive gut reaction to certain actions, right? Yeah. I have very little idea, to be all honest, right?
It's hard with this.
I'm leaning towards, it's more of a cover up sort of thing where it doesn't actually change your inside intuition, but it's like the intuition basically, if you think about it like there's Russian dolls, right? The intuition is like the little one in the middle, and then like the indoctrination wraps around it like 100 times, right? And so you have to peel back a lot of indoctrination to get to the root of killing is bad, but then on the outside it's killing is good because of all these cultural reasons that I've been brought up in, right?
Yeah.
I like to think that maybe this is just hope that our intuition from God cannot be so easily manipulated by human beings, and it's just being covered up and distorted, and if we were to peel back those layers of cultural indoctrination, you can get back to the truth that of the truth of moral truths. If you're a bit more pessimistic, maybe you say, well, we can just be corrupted like that. But yeah. I like to hope that our moral intuition is not so easily defiled.
Yeah, it is really interesting to think as well. Put yourself in the mind of someone like that. A kid, for example, who's grown up in that sort of indoctrination, and to think that they actually think they're doing the right thing, and so it's not like they're conflicted on it. It's not even that.
Yeah, because there is a sense in which, their intuition is saying, this is correct. I'm helping. This is the good. This is the good. I'm pointing towards the good. But then it's obviously not. And so where does that intuition come from?
And I think that's it. It's the cycle. God gives us free will.
Yeah.
And with that comes all these issues with the psychological.
Yeah.
People have mental illness and whatever. I don't know if that's connected to free will, but you know what I mean. This is so, and mental, certain psychological things can override
Yeah.
their immediate conscience.
Yeah, I think it's an override rather than a corruption. At least I hope it's an override rather than a corruption.
Yeah.
Right? Because an override, you can peel it back. Because corruption, it would be insane. But I would be interested to hear what the listeners think about this whole topic. I think, unless you've got any more questions.
But I think to end it, I think there has to be a conscience there.
Yeah.
Because if we look over history, as humans, we've always understood certain things to be
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah. We've always understood certain things to be wrong, right? Even if you look at, like, the Aztecs who performed human sacrifice, right? They did that because they had an aversion to more people starving. So they still viewed death as wrong, right? They still viewed killing as wrong, but they viewed that not doing the human sacrifice is akin to killing their people because it would cause the rain to stop or whatever, right? And so I think it is a cross-cultural thing. Like, I don't think you can find a culture, and maybe you can, but I don't think you can find a culture that actively seeks to kill it itself, right? Or completely, like, that's like a severe, like, anti-natalist philosophy, where it's like, life is actively bad, so we should actively kill each other. I don't think you can find that culture because I think there is an innate intuition across culture that says, we shouldn't kill each other, right?
And yet we do.
And yet we do. And yet we do. I think that's the cultural thing
Yeah.
that covers up the intuition, right? Which is wrong, but we can peel it back, and the intuition is still there, right? The baseline intuition is still there, but it gets covered up and hidden, I think, by all these other factors surrounding us.
I think that's a good place to leave it.
I do think that's a good place to leave it. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed episode 4.
I certainly did.
Yes, I certainly enjoyed that. And we will see you next week.
Yeah.
Next week.
Keep on discussing, keep on debating.
Yes, keep on thinking.
Talking.
Keep on thinking. Never stop thinking. Actually, maybe sometimes stop thinking.
Yeah, sometimes take a break.
Take a break.
Anyways.
Alright, see ya. Cool.